The June sun in southern Arizona beat down like hot steel. The heat rose from the parched earth, making the gravel sparkle like broken glass. In the distance, Sosorchium, the Santa Rita Range was a pale blue-gray, as if the hills themselves were melting in the heat. A single red dirt road led into Dry Hollow, a town made up of 3 rows of log cabins, a limestone well, a rickety stable, and a church with a steeple. The wind whistled through the old saguaro trees, carrying with it the hot sand and the smell of sweat and fur. Maribel Mary Lane walked slowly down the road. Her faded indigo dress patched with silver thread billowed in the wind. Fine dust clung to her skirts and tanned arms. Behind her was a faded canvas backpack, heavy with the smell of flour and sweat from the 40-plus miles from Rancho Red Mesa. Her right hand clutched a Lodge cast-iron skillet, her mother's gilded with a dark, burned oil finish, and on the rim of the glass flask strapped to her hip. The drink was barely a fingertip. The moment Mary stepped past the paint-stained wooden sign, Dusty Spur Saloon, the wind lifted the flap of her straw hat that had been torn off the edge. She squinted in the roof of the porch, a dark cobweb of dust red as burnt fishing line. Behind the hotel, the smell of strong liquor, the sound of a banjo and a raucous laugh drifted. Mari inhaled deeply, smelling moldy grain, acetone-laced cane sugar, and burnt bacon. It was the typical smell of half-lost, half-held desert saloons in the Wild West, and also the smell of opportunity, if you seasoned it with enough salt, pepper, and hope. Inside the Dusty Spur was dim. The kerosene lamp swayed. The pine floors creaked under Murray's feet. Behind the counter, Gideon Ross, black hair, gray beard, sandpaper dry eyes, was counting the corn liquor. He looked up when the cast-iron skillet hit the scratched counter with a crack. I'm not my mother, Mari said, glancing at the guys who were waiting for something ridiculous. But I'm a good cook. Just one meal. Taste it and decide, Ross snorted. He had seen dozens of vagrants applying for jobs as waiters, bartenders, and sweepers. But a girl holding a cast-iron skillet, her shirt covered in flour, speaking in a flat voice, strange her you're my one. He curled his lips. If you're good, prove it. Kitchen on the porch. Corn. Rochesterum. Orie. Some green chilies. Sermia ressusur worse. Shermon. Well, water with alum. We'll see what you can make. Mari bent down to pick up the bag of corn kernels he'd just thrown 3 tables away. Nodding curtly, as she turned around, she heard gossip whispering behind her. Dawn Lane's daughter. She'd run away so far, but she still ended up in Dry Hollow. The stairs were like knives. But Mari was used to it. The desert was wide, and the rumors were even wider. The back porch of the shop was just a crooked wooden frame joined together with rusty nails, covered with a warped tin sheet and a single iron stove with broken legs reinforced with a stone. Mari lit the fire with sooty mesquite wood, smelling the sweet aroma of the smoke seeping through the vine that covered the wind wall. Cast iron pots and pans, the only 2 things she brought. The corn was washed with alum-laced well water, then green chili, dried coriander leaves, and cumin powder were added. The boiling bop-bop sound rang out. Mari stirred, feeling each ripple. For a fleeting moment, memories arose. The old wooden roof in Rancho Red Mesa, where her mother, Dawn Lane, had disappeared after a serious illness. Every evening, she rolled up her sleeves, swung the pan, her cheeks rosy in the firelight. The first spice of every meal is courage. Marie, she would say, tapping her spoon on the rim of the pot like a gong, then lowered her voice. And the last spice is to keep standing. Even when the coals are dead. Mari paused, pushing the memory back. The smoke rose, carrying the strong scent of green chilies that overpowered the smell of horse manure. She sprinkled rock salt, a pinch of pepper, and threw in 6 pieces of dried beef bones soaked in well water. The water turned amber, a layer of white foam rolling. Mari's back was soaked with sweat. Her face glowed in the glowing embers. It was dusk. The Dusty Spur was noisy. The miners were fishing, their tongues thirsty for wine. Ross was wearily wiping his glasses. From the porch, Mari carried a pot of corn soup with green chilies. Steaming, the aroma wafted in, interrupting the laughter. Getchwasterstone. Here's a sample. She set the pot on the counter, ladling it into a cracked-rimmed porcelain bowl. The steam mixed with the scent of cinnamon and green chili. The corn was just ripe and still springy. Who dares to refuse? The next glass is invited. Ross held the ladle, his throat once thick with moonshine, choked as the sweet corn and the slight spiciness of chili crept across his nose. His rough skin cracked. He put down the bowl, nodding slowly. Come back tomorrow morning. The sound of tables and chairs moving. Miners clamored for bowls to be filled. Someone poured leftover wine into a tray, exchanging it for soup. The smoke curled in the oil lamplight, shimmering like a short silk strip in the desert night. Mari retreated to the corner, observing. What she saw now was more than empty bowls. There were rumbling stomachs, voices of gratitude, a chance for the inner strength of the house to ignite hope. The least spice Dry Hollow lacked. For the next 3 days, green peppercorn soup became the most popular dish than wine. Ross, always stingy, rubbed his hands, bought another bag of corn and a few bones. Mari woke up before the chickens, cooked cornbread with cheese, braised pinto beans, and stewed caramelized onions under red bricks. The aroma wafted out to the police station, into the cactus fields, and made the vultures around the wasteland curious. But along with the scent, rumors spread. Dawn Lane's daughter, who used to, someone whispered about mysterious problems. Blood debts, stolen cargo, a night of fire in the Proudfoot barn. Mari still held the pan, tasting the soup with her mother's wooden ladle, her face calm, her heart tinged with a threat. On a Saturday evening, the wind blew across the floor of the restaurant, carrying with it a red dust that smelled of iron. A whistle sounded in the distance. Unhappy. Outside, Mari saw a gray dust swirling around the 10-horse silhouettes. Outlined against the lingering setting sun, a black flag fluttered at the head of the column. A goat skull hastily drawn in pale white. Barrett Cole. Needless to say, that group of names represented the protection fees of every town around Santa Rita. The horse stopped in front of Dusty Spur. Barrett, the burly man standing across the back of the ebony stallion paint, caught a glimpse of Marie in the open kitchen doorway. He smirked. Thank goodness. Dawn Lane's daughter knows how to crawl into a small hole. How do you calculate old debts? Mari held the ladle still, her back straight. Ross stood blocking the counter, giving a few people with limp glasses a warning look. Barrett passed by, spitting on the Dusty Spur sign, then laughed. You're still winning the wine, no. The horses mixed with the sand, leaving a menacing aftertaste like the scent of dead skunk. At night, when you were now born, Mari sat alone on the kitchen steps. The wind was no longer hot but carried the smell of burning sand. She cupped her hand over the oil lamp, shining on the wooden ladle. The handle had been scorched a long way since the Red Mesa fire. Trembling, she remembered her mother kneeling in the middle of the burning house, saying, "Take this ladle. As long as you can cook a meal for them, I will live in you again." Mari clenched the ladle tightly, looking up at Ross's silhouette as he walked out. He didn't say anything, just placed a bag of fresh cornmeal beside her. A silent oath. As long as this stove burns, I'll be there. Mari smiled. Inside, the red embers flared up the first spark. The sky was barely light, and the space between Santa Rita and Dry Hollow was already filled with mist. A rare, chilly June morning wind drifted through the scattered heather and into the slender side windows of the Dusty Spur. Marlene got up before the old rooster in the Vaughn coop crowed. She washed her face with some well water from a wooden bucket, wiped it across the cracked mirror, and saw in the opaque frame the brown eyes that sparkled with sleepless fire. The backyard was dark. Mari lit the fire with mesquite branches chopped yesterday. The fragrant wood crackled, turned blue, and then rose. The firelight reflected off the sparse wooden walls, drawing patterns like desert faces. She poured the corn kernels soaked overnight into the copper pot, the smell of grain wafting, scooped in green chilies from the second-class coach, sprinkled with dried dill, and a little crushed black pepper. The steam rose hazily, mixed with the mesquite smoke, creating a distinctive sweet aroma, enough to shake one even before the sun rose. Hesitating for a moment, Mari pulled a chipped wooden ladle from her cloth bag and gently rubbed the edge of the pot. The burnt mark was now like an invisible signature, reminding her the last spice is to keep standing, even when the embers are dead. She smiled, stirring the excitement and the budding ambition amidst the ashes. It was almost 7 o'clock, and the first rays of sunlight cut diagonally through the row of wooden houses. The kitchen smoke turned golden, mixed with the smell of steaming horsehide from the stable next door. Gideon Ross pushed open the back door, holding the debt book in his hand. It had been a long time since he had woken up so early, Dusty Spur's former landlady had once asserted, drinkers rise after the sun. Waking up early is a waste of oil. But today Ross smelled the corn soup. His eyes were clear without coffee. It smells like a decent home kitchen. Not my rat's nest, Ross grumbled. But the corners of his lips curled up involuntarily. Murray set him the first bowl of soup. Ross took a spoonful, the mild, spicy scent following up the bridge of his nose. The smooth taste of corn mixed with a bit of beef fat. A warm, spicy aftertaste. He nodded slightly, a rare compliment. A moment later, Bill McKinney, a bearded miner, clicked his hobnailed boots on the floor. Give me that heavenly bowl. Then Tobias Long, the veterinarian, Reverend Whitlock, a Cornesian before Nasuri Din Kumarn, a short, stooped old minister, and the coal boys stopped by the sidewalk. Looking at him longingly, Mari scooped up bowl after bowl. The slurping sound mingled with the banjo in the shop, creating a strange, softer background music than the usual clinking of wine glasses. At noon, the 2 pots of soup were empty. Ross counted the empty bowls piled higher than the stack of glass cups that had long been collecting dust. He glanced at Murray, a young girl with sweat on her back and dark hair on the back of her neck. A thought flashed through his mind. Maybe I should really buy a Cookhouse sign. But he kept his characteristic curtness, just tossed Murray a bottle of cool well water and muttered, "Eat something. It's crowded this afternoon." Mari accepted, smiling, her smile tinged with ash and hope. In the afternoon, the Dusty Spur was as busy as a beehive in the honey season. Silver miners from the nearby canyon came in after their shifts, their coats stained with ore dust. They huddled around the largest wooden table, some downing their drinks, others waiting for soup. The horse corral in front of the restaurant was crowded, the dust kicked up by each hoofbeat hovering in the sunset like mica scales. And through the glaring window, Ross saw thin nickel and silver coins lying at the bottom of the money tray. Somewhere there was a tattered $5 bill, something he rarely kept for more than half a day because of his liquor debts. Ross got excited and pulled the old, battered banjo from under the counter. His fingers, which had been nimble in passing glasses, plucked the old steel strings. The sound was off-key, rough but warm. The miners applauded. Mari brought a tray of cheese cornbread from the back porch, placing golden slices on the table. Steaming with milk. No one mentioned the wine until the soup and cornbread were half gone. Ross, who had always feared an empty bar, was both thrilled and thrilled to see the packed seats. He plucked the strings tighter, sweat beading his forehead. And as the afternoon sun turned purple, Dusty Spur heard for the first time a whistling sound, more cheerful than a quarrel over a liquor debt. Where smoke rises, fire follows, Ross muttered, remembering an old Mexican proverb. Mari's kitchen fire was drawing another fire, the fire of living. The next morning, when Mari got up to stack the firewood, the 3 washerwomen, Alma, Inez, and Pilar, were standing in the backyard, holding baskets of cotton. Alma laughed loudly. "We heard your angel was a miner who quit drinking, so we had to come and see." Inez placed a bag of onions and fresh oregano around the well. Pilar was carrying a bag of coarse sea salt. Mari paused. She was not used to receiving free gifts. Alma tapped her shoulder. "We pay with spices. You pay with fragrance. Fair and square." From a distance, Reverend Whitlock leaned on his wooden cane, leading 2 orphans who owned the coal book, the paper that recorded the debt for charcoal around town. The old man was trembling, but his eyes were bright. "How I can't share more. The Lord says, bread shared, smoke rises to the sky. I haven't seen smoke so beautiful since the church bells stopped." Mari was moved, swallowing her emotions. Her mother would have smiled if she had seen this. She rolled up her sleeves, showed the kids where to pick up firewood, taught Alma how to sprinkle rock salt on the top of the soup, showed Inez how to slurp pinto beans at the right moment to keep them thick, and laughed when Pilar clumsily spilled half a spoonful of fennel seeds on her own skirt. Smoke rose from the kitchen, mingling with laughter, making the dry hollow glow a brilliant copper color. But not everyone was happy. Next door, Clayton Rigg, a horse rancher and longtime bootlegger, held Sheriff Orson Blake and whispered, "That girl who pulled people off my bar, and she has the troublesome Lane name." Rumors had been flying. Dawn Lane had a blood debt with the Barrett Coal Gang, a dead mother, a debt paid with her daughter's head. In the desert, news was flying. Sheriff Blake was originally from Kansas and usually avoided conflict. He brushed it off, but his eyes toward Dusty Spur were also tinged with worry. The bar had lit up too quickly. becoming an unwanted focal point. At noon, Mari took the soup across the street to sell to the wheelwright. She heard, "Breach a rear, she'll bring a storm soon," whispers, evasive glances. The fragrant smoke from the pot suddenly turned into a sea of suspicious, burning steam behind her. On Thursday, while Ross played the tune of Red River Valley on his banjo, two drunken men, Rudy Clay and Moss Wheeler, got into a fight over a question about whether the soup was less spicy or more spicy. Moss swung his glass. Rudy choked on the corn wine and slammed the table. The whole restaurant stopped laughing. Ross put down his guitar, trying to grab Rudy, but he was half a beat too late. Mari herself, a head smaller than the two men, threw the cast iron pan on the table. The metallic clang loud enough. The light from the oil lamp reflected on the pan's surface as black as a war drum. "Whoever spills the soup has to wash the pot all night." Her voice was not high, but firm. Rudy paused, glanced at the pan, remembered the rumor that the lodge pan had smashed the mother buffalo's skull, and stammered. Moss swallowed. "No fight." They retreated to their seats, embarrassedly picking at the wine stains on their shirts. The whole bar burst into laughter. Ross breathed a sigh of relief, as if he had just witnessed the hand of God. He looked at Mari. The girl put down the pan, bent down to stir the pot, her cheeks flushed with pride. After that incident, Dusty Spur spread another anecdote. The cook girl held the pan more tenderly than a gun. It was both funny and creepy, and Barrett Cole, at a stop 10 miles away, heard it too. Dry Hollow was rarely bustling on Friday nights, but that day, the smoke from Mari's kitchen was so high that someone said, you could see all the way to Proudfoot Church. Ross had built a plank counter on the porch. Mari had added a pot of pinto beans, a tray of cheese cornbread, a cauldron of caramelized tomato sauce, and a small pot of chili Colorado, a new hot item. She kept the fire low, the deep red chili powder mixed with beef fat and water to form a shimmering, brick-colored sauce that smelled as spicy as if embracing the desert. The smoke mixed with chili oil, against the light of the new moon, floated like a red silk ribbon. People from neighboring farms came in droves. A group of Aspen lumbermen teased the three washerwomen, who responded with laughter crisper than crowbars. Children giggled around the pot, learning from Ross to play the banjo. Reverend Whitlock leaned on his cane and tapped his lips with a glass of corn water instead of white wine. Dusty Spur, the old name, had suddenly become a communal fire, where wood, smoke, and people mingled into a feast. Dry Hollow, for the first time since the town's founding, heard laughter well past curfew. Marianima, in her rare free time, stood against the porch pillar, wiping her sweat and looking at the crowd. The kitchen lights cast a honey glow on her face. Someone, probably Whitlock, mumbled, "She lights her own ashes." Mari listened, her heart aching for her mother, but also filled with gentle pride. The night was late. And Dusty Spur's lights were dimming. Only Mari's stove was glowing, and a few guitars were strummed. Ross closed the front door, stacked chairs on the table, and glanced at the pile of earnings more than 2 weeks' worth combined. He smiled, a dry smile worn by years that seemed to breathe life. Mari, her hands covered in ash and grease, wiped the cast iron skillet with a towel and set it on the rack. She planned to try something new tomorrow morning, cinnamon molasses donuts, to give the kids a taste of sweetness. The last of the smoke curled into thin threads, dissipating in the night wind. But just on the western trail, where the desert met the sand, a campfire flickered. A black flag waved slowly. The neighing of horses echoed in the distance. Mari did not see it. Ross did not notice. But the wind shifted, bringing with it another smell of smoke. Musk. Old gunpowder. It smoldered, waiting for a chance to intrude on the warm fire Mari had lit. Later in the evening, the wind changed, and Mari's cooked smoke cleared. Above, the desert stars twinkled, indifferent to human grievances. Mari put down her ladle, looked up at the black sky, silently thanking her mother. The smoke rose, she thought. The fire would spread, for better or worse. Then she pulled the kitchen cover, closed the door, and hid the pounding of her heart. Tomorrow, in the hot wind, would blow again. But tonight, Dry Hollow was healed by the smell of soup. Mari fell asleep on the porch bench, her hands still loosely holding the handle of the burning ladle. In her dream, she saw the smoke curling into the shape of a red phoenix, spreading its wings over Dusty Spur, causing the whole cabin to flicker with the fire. smoke rising, fire waiting, and in the desert night, another wind was about to roll red dust into Dry Hollow. The night after Dusty Spur had fallen into a hasty banjo song, Ross climbed into the loft to take a nap. Marie turned over on the porch bench, her hand still loosely holding the handle of the burning wooden ladle. In her dream, she saw the campfire in the distance to the west, right where the black flag had been raised at the end of the previous chapter. When she woke up, the sky was gray. Dawn had not yet come, but the desert wind was unusually hot, carrying the smell of wet coal smoke and the acrid smell of old guns. Returning, Mari turned on the stove, simmering a pot of chili Colorado soup, letting the spicy fumes mix with the wind, hoping to cover the threatening smell. But cooking couldn't dispel the thought. Barrett was somewhere on the sand, plotting his debt that he'd mentioned. That afternoon, Sheriff Orson Blake walked into the tavern on crutches. He put his tattered fedora on the counter, breathing hard, saw the campfire not 7 miles away. The goat skull flag. Must be coal. Ross put down his glass of corn syrup, his face pale. The people in the tavern suddenly fell silent. The soup spoons stood still in the bowls. Mari bent down to stir the pot of beans to cover up the movement. But her heart was pounding. Was it that close? The sheriff was exhausted, but he still glanced at Mari. If you ever mess with Barrett, I need to know. The town must be prepared. Mari answered truthfully. Dawn Lane had once rescued a group of people from a barn Barrett had set on fire to extort money. He vowed to wipe out the Lanes. The news made Blake frown deeply. Blood on blood. But Dry Hollow doesn't leave the ladle holder to turn wine into dinner. And having said this, he rose and announced that there would be a town meeting the following evening. At the door he turned back. Don't turn off the stove. People need the smoke of the soup to believe that this place is still standing. The next evening, the tiny wooden church, which had no bells, was packed. The hot wind blew through the door, turning the pages of the scriptures, hitting people's faces. On the long table, Blake spread out a parchment map of the town. The oil lamplight flickered, illuminating the faces of Alma, Inez Shimmers Thur, Pslar and Sundara, the bearded Bill McKinney, and Reverend Whitlock. Ross had brought his banjo, not to play, but as a casualty. Mari explained it neatly. Barrett usually came at dusk, burned down the shop, and stole the wages. Ross proposed to block the caravan on the main road. Bill, a hard-working miner, took up the post. Alma and the Washing sisters promised to sew sandbags to block the windows. Whitlock said in a low voice, "The Bible says, ashes nourish the grain. We have sprouted from the stove, Marie. Now keep the fire." When the discussion was about to turn into a fight because of the lack of guns, Mari tapped the edge of the table with a ladle. A familiar sound, like the church bells, had not yet been heard. Cole wants me, but this fire is blown by the whole of Dry Hollow. If the stove goes out, he will attack every roof. So instead of waiting for guns, let's build shields with what we have. She laid out the plan, set up a field kitchen around the square, with red coals constantly burning, in addition to food. A horse-stopping fire. Use cast iron pots as cannons with castor oil, and children blow out the greased cloth to scare them. Women poured boiling water from the porch. Ross played the banjo to drum the rhythm for the entire population to coordinate, the signal to change positions. It sounded crazy, but in the desert, every strategy started with no guns. Early the next morning, Mari took Ross and the children to the square to practice the cast iron pot dance. With each splash of oil, Ross strummed a banjo string. The children threw wet sand onto a wooden target, pretending to be a horse. The laundry team practiced pouring boiling water from the attic. Scene was both funny and tough. The kitchen smoke, the oil vapor, and the children's laughter mixed with the hot wind, causing passers-by to stop and applaud. A traveler whispered to Ross, who answered simply, "We make soup, the kind used by those with black flags." The word spread, becoming an anecdote. Faith in Dry Hollow, once again, rose with the kitchen smoke. On Tuesday afternoon, the temperature dropped sharply. The south wind blew up, whipping up red dust. On the edge of the desert, Reverend Whitlock, washing on a journey to the altar, saw a moving black streak. Barrett's cavalry was moving camp, their horses tied to the supplies. Whitlock rode back quickly, the altar half falling along the way. The news reached Dusty Spur as the sun was dark, golden as molten bronze. Mari was mixing cornmeal when she stopped. Ross patted her on the shoulder. "If they come tomorrow, I promise to feed the fire. I can't go back on my word. Mari looked at the burning ladle. In the cracks of the burning wood, she heard her mother's voice. The last spice is to keep standing. She looked up and answered Ross with a smile that was hardened by dust. Then I'll add a new spices. He hotter, she poured most of the jar of dried chilies into the chili Colorado pot, letting the red, pungent smell fill the air. The hot vapors rose up to the gutters, making everyone who passed by tear up, either from the smoke or from fear. It was unclear. That night the town closed early. Every house had its kerosene lamps dimmed, saving fuel for the day of the doom. Only Dusty Spur was still glowing. Mario, Rosa Rehanoman, and Bill watched the stove, taking turns adding firewood. On the table, the fun. The banjo stood upright next to the old Springfield. Two different objects, but both would sing when the dawn broke with the sound of horses' hooves. Before dawn, Mari quietly went to the back of the shop. She took some cold ashes and sprinkled them on the newly sprouted pumpkin patch. The ashes stuck to her hands and were black. But in the moonlight, the fat pumpkin seeds were emerging, the young leaves shining purple. Mari whispered, "Mother, I'll keep the stove until these seeds are golden." The hot wind blew through the porch, swirling the ashes. In the distance, dogs howled, then fell silent. Mari turned and closed the door. Inside the shop, Ross dozed next to the stove, the Springfield on his pillow. Bill leaned in the shade. Mari added firewood. The flames splattering blue. The hot wind whistled through the cracks in the door. It seemed to carry the echo of iron hooves. Barrett Cole had not yet appeared, but the shadow was already in the heart of the town. Smoke curled up, embracing Dusty Spur like a silkworm cocoon. The lean community of Dry Hollow clung tightly to the smell of chili. The dawn would decide who would win, which ashes would sprout, which fires would go out. Mari sat on the hot wooden floor, her back against the wall, her eyes closed but not sleeping. She held the handle of the burning ladle between her hands, like the smallest ember, the seed of a firestorm. The rooster had barely broken its throat when a heavy cacophony of horse hooves reverberated across the red, dusty road. Bill McKenney, the night watchman, had just stretched out from the steps of the tavern when he smelled the smell of gunpowder mixed with the hot wind. At the end of the street, a line of fires flickered in the darkness, the last of the oil-soaked torches that Barrett Cole had burned all night. Bill sounded the alarm 3 high-pitched whistles, 2 low squeals, the exact signal Ross had given him on his banjo the night before. Marina Fordun, who was adding more coals to the stove, heard it, threw down her ladle, and rushed out the back door. Russ Shepherd Sobwinin, holding his guitar like a hammer, turned and pulled the trigger on his Springfield, but Barrett didn't wait for them to get into position. He spurred his horse straight into the Dusty Spur porch post. Beside Barrett's saddle, the goat skull flag whizzed in the wind. He pulled out 2 bottles of kerosene and threw them, drawing a line of fire onto the dry wooden roof of the tavern. The tiles cracked, and the yellow flames flared up in a savage cry. "Ashes pay ashes. Alain Tormotenenimon," Barrett roared, his eyes fixed on Mari, who stood frozen on the doorstep. His men fanned out, lighting torches and waving them at the newly erected camp stoves. The flames touched the dried chilies, sending red seeds crackling. The pungent smell filled the square, stirring up panic. The main street became a furnace. Ross shouted orders to retreat, but Mari stopped him. "Keep the pot." The giant chili Colorado pot was the heart of the kitchen. And now the heart of the town. She and Alma rushed through the embers, carrying the boiling pot by 2 handles. Staggering down the back well, the flames licked the hem of their skirts, and the beef fat spilled onto their slippers, burning them. As soon as they disappeared into the well, the Dusty Spur awning snapped. The crossbeam fell on the bar. The whole room exploded like a firecracker. The bottle of illegal corn caught fire and scattered glass. Ash began to cover the kitchen floor. Not mesquite ash this time, but ash that swallowed the fire. "Keep the smoke. Deciman, Chubun. Don't be afraid." Sheriff Blake led several young men with sandbags and rushed to the base of the bar to prevent the fire from spreading to the houses. Inez and Pilar, the laundry sisters, rushed upstairs, tipped the reserve cauldron of boiling water, and poured it over Barrett's men. The screams were bright, but they stopped the bandits. Ross, still holding the Springfield, pressed his back against the remaining fireplace pillar. and fired 2 shots, forcing Barrett back from the lobby. The old bullet missed, only grazed the horse's shoulder, but it was enough for Tobias Long to drag a pregnant woman out of the nearby tavern, whose roof was on fire. Mari and Alma returned, sweat and beef fat glistening, to put the pot of soup down on the street. The hot pepper fumes rose, mixing with the burning smoke to create a stinging curtain. Mari seized the opportunity, shouting, "Cover your faces, cover their horses with pepper spray." The coal boys, remembering the cast iron dance, threw handfuls of wet coal-soaked sand into the fire, and thick black smoke rolled across the saddle. Barrett's horse whinnied in panic. The soup smoke, the coal smoke, the wood roof smoke crisscrossed into a gray curtain that made any gun barrel opaque. In the smoke, Tiyashi did Riseburn. Mari heard a crack. The main beam of the kitchen collapsed. She turned her head and saw that the room where the cornbread had been cooked was now a red torch. But in the midst of the red, her mother's burning wooden ladle was still reflected in the fire. She rushed forward. Ross shouted to stop her in time. Mari's sleeve caught fire, but she brushed it against the floor, snatched the ladle, and rolled off the porch before the roof collapsed completely. The cinders burned and burned everyone's faces. When the smoke cleared, Dusty Spur had no roof. Only the blackened column was spitting fire like a spent skeleton. Barrett saw the scene, laughed triumphantly, and was about to spur his horse into a final charge, but he suddenly fell to his knees. Ross had just fired his last shot, the bullet cutting through his thigh. Sheriff Blake and Bill rushed forward to tie him up with a clothesline, as planned, but Barrett hissed, punched Bill into the dust, then dragged his bloody feet up the cracked wooden steps of the burning shop, roaring, "I set the stove on fire. I want her to turn team one. Muddy, whiny mim." Her skirt singed, stood in the ashes, holding the burning ladle, facing him. The hot smoke made her eyes red, but her voice was clear. "You think you've won by turning wood into charcoal? This ash only feeds a new fire. You are a body of cold ash." Barrett swung her knife, but her wounded knee wobbled. Alma threw a bag of sand, hitting him in the head. It was no longer difficult to tie him up. As the rope tightened around her arm, Barrett looked around. The bandits had dispersed, each one blown away by the ash and boiling water. Running out of town, the main fire was dying down, leaving only embers and the smell of burning wood. The sky was clear. The stolen dawn had finally broken through the smoke. Ash covered the inn's courtyard, so thick that each step made a rustling sound. Mari knelt down, grabbed a handful of still warm ash, letting it fall through her fingers like needles. All eyes were on her. Ross with his scorched arm, Blake leaning on his crutch, the children complaining about their scorched faces, the women washing their hair with soot. Sorry, she said, hoarse from the smoke. "I don't blame anyone who wants to leave. But if you stay, tomorrow you'll bake bread with this coal. This afternoon you'll plaster the stove with this ashes." Sheriff Blake, in Wawawartikan, who was more afraid of trouble than anyone else, was the first to nod. Bill helped Ross up. Alma put her hands together on the iron grates and raked the ashes. Reverend Whitlock raised a scorched Bible and read a quote, his voice trembling but steady. From the ashes, "The sons of dust shall rise." The blackened frame of the tavern was tinged with the orange-red glow of dawn. Down the street, the sound of saws was already in full swing. A few miners had begun to saw off planks from an abandoned barn to make temporary support posts. In the ashes, the pumpkin seeds Mari had planted a few days earlier were still sprouting thin green shoots. Mari stuck a burning wooden ladle into the ash in the middle of the square, a flag that did not flutter in the wind, but enough to keep the people of Dry Hollow gathered around it. The only breakfast left was a half-eaten pot of chili Colorado, but everyone slurped it up, tears in their eyes, and laughed, a hoarse, smoky laugh that was as bright as copper. At noon, Barrett was taken to the county car, suburban. Before leaving, he glanced back at Dusty Spur's skeleton one last time and froze. On the burning post, a rough wooden sign had been temporarily installed, engraved in black charcoal. Dusty Spur Cookhouse. Old ashes feed new fire. The midday sun glinted on the lettering, shining directly into the robber's eyes. Barrett growled a final curse, but the sound of the wheels rolling on the gravel drowned it out. Mari stood beside Ross. He had his arm in a cast, grinning. "The old stove is gone. Little one, Mari replied, raising the burning ladle high. "Then I'll light a new one, hotter, but dirtier and dinner." The midday wind blew the ash away, but through the ash, the ground was still cracked and exposed to the sunlight, enough for the roots to endure. And when the sound of the saw mixed with the hoarse laughter, Dry Hollow understood. The danger was gone, but the ash remained. It was the ash that would germinate a new crop of cornbread, more fragrant, sweeter, if only the fire was kept alive. Narration, 3 days after the fire, the charred wooden frame of the dusty spur had been mostly dismantled. The ground in front of the shop was covered with a fine layer of gray ash, like strange snow in the red desert. Mari woke up to the smell of damp pine resin and the sound of saws from the reluctant miners turned carpenters. She quickly checked the squash sprouts. The young leaves were still growing. The edges were slightly burnt, but stubbornly green. On the side of the road, Alma pulled up her apron and wiped her forehead. Building the kitchen walls today? Huh. Mari nodded. She had sketched out the layout of the new cookhouse. A low roof, a wide porch with enough benches for a dozen long chairs, a fire-resistant brick stove placed in the middle so the smoke would spread evenly. Ross, his arm still in a splint, carried a bucket of nails and muttered, "I'll take care of the columns and beams. But the brick oven has to be stronger than the heart of the hand holding the ladle." Mari smiled, patting a roll of grease-proof paper. "It will be strong because it's plastered with Barrett's ash." When the first pile wall was finished, Mari lit a makeshift stove in the middle of the square. She mixed cornstarch, sourdough, and some leftover molasses. The children came sniffing, their mouths watering. Pilar and Inez rolled up their sleeves and kneaded, their laughter ringing like a mortar and pestle. Each cornbread was baked on a cast-iron skillet placed close to the fire, puffed up golden and slightly charred around the edges. Mari deliberately sprinkled some red pepper flakes, both spicy and aromatic, so that the smoke from the bread mixed with the yeast rose up, completely overpowering the lingering smell of burning wood. Ross tried to pluck 2 strings of the banjo. The sound spread high, mingling with the scent of the bread, turning the ash field into a warm square. Passers-by stopped. Sheriff Blake leaned forward on crutches. Mari pushed a hot bread, bit into a spicy piece and smiled. That smile, rarely seen in him, became a signal. Dry Hollow was capable of transforming the burnt smell into the smell of new yeast. After noon, Mari mixed finely ground coal ash with clay and well water, and poured it into brick molds. The ash made the bricks light and heat-retaining, a secret her mother had taught her. Bill McKenney and the miners used tightly pressed wooden molds. The ash bricks were hardened after just one afternoon in the sun. Ross exclaimed, "His coals became my oven belly." Kitchen justice. In the afternoon, Yarmacho Nimwarch, Cherokee. The new stove was built as high as Marie's chest. She inlaid a wooden ladle with a burnt end, the handle sticking out like a badge, in the middle of the stove. When the last ash brick was covered, Alma tried pouring a bucket of water into the cavity. Steam hissed. The bricks closed. No smoke leaked. The group applauded. The sound reverberated through the row of houses with closed windows, kicking up dust. The next morning, just as Mary was preparing the first batch of bread to bake in the new oven, a mournful bleating echoed down the street. The children ran back, pale. In front of the stove, a female goat had been cut open, its ribs stuffed with black ash, its intestines sticking out like a mourning band. A piece of wood was tied around the goat's neck with the inscription, "Your fire will soon turn to dung." No signature was needed. Everyone knew that Barrett, though he had been taken to the district, still had his men and women spreading threats. The town was silent. The yeast in Mary's hand was shaking. Inez burst into tears. Ross gritted his teeth. About to lift the Springfield out of bullets, Blake whispered, "If they come back, we won't have any guns." The warmth of the square suddenly turned to stone. Mary looked at the goat, remembering the smoky memory of the day the restaurant burned down. Remembering her mother's words, "Ash nourishes the grain." She slowly walked forward, picked up a handful of ash from the goat's belly, and dropped it into the half-mixed mortar bucket next to the stove. The strangely calm gesture made the crowd hold their breath. Mari looked up, her voice hoarse but firm. "All ash is mortar. Our stove hasn't plastered the inside roof yet. We need more." Then she gave the order. "Cut the goat's shroud. Bury the body right in the pumpkin bed. Goat dung nourishes the dry soil." Sheriff Blake was the first to stick the shovel down. When the soil was covered, Mari sprinkled the remaining ash into the mortar bucket and continued to plaster the stove roof. Fear was like smoke, stirred into the dough by the ladle. Dawn, the ash stove was hot enough. Mari put the tray of cornmeal cakes, the salty ash version, into the compartment. The fire was brewing, and the smoke from the mesquite and red peppers was rising up the newly built chimney. The smell of the burnt edges, the yeasty corn, the black pepper bisorbinum, and the fumes of the baked clay combined to create a fragrance no one had ever smelled before. When the bread was done, Mari placed the tray on the long table, new shingles. She cut off the first piece and gave it to Ross, the second to Alma, and then scattered it to each of the men who had dug, sawed, buried the goats, made the bricks. Blake took a bite, his eyes stinging this time from the peppers. He held the pie high. If the gifts come again, I'll bake it twice as thick. The crowd laughed, the hammers pounding in rhythm. Ross's banjo blared, hard times come again. No more an old tune, but a new fire. The evening wind blew through the dusty spur cookhouse, carrying the spicy, yeasty scent of pies through Dry Hollow. Distant roofs opened, and people looked up at the ash chimneys, knowing that the town had a warm heart again. At night, when the hammering stopped, Mari went out to the pumpkin patch. The young leaves, absorbing the goat ash, swelled and became dark green. Ross put his casted hand on her shoulder. The walls are done. The roof is done. The shop will open again the day after tomorrow. Are you tired of it? Mari laughed, the light of the stove reflecting in her eyes. As long as the smoke is still rising, the stove will have adversity to season. I'm not tired of it yet. She piled up the soil around the base of the pumpkin and whispered, Pumpkin, onafrinum. This time the ash is better. It's really big. In the desert sky, the Milky Way fell like a streak of silver flour. The night wind carried the smell of uncooled yeast. Dry Hollow slept, but the heart of the stove was still warm with ashes. The rhythm of the fire buried in the east, reminding everyone that the old ash still fed the new fire, and the new fire could ferment hope for a town that had once been cracked. A week after the goat gift, the early desert wind carried a thicker layer of dust than usual. Just as Mari bent over to light the first batch of cornbread of the day, Sheriff Blake galloped up on horseback, his cloak streaked with ashes. Barrett Cole has escaped. Blake threw the County Gazette on the kitchen table. The paper, still damp with ink, was hastily scribbled. Inmate Barrett Cole escaped on the night of the 15th, shot and wounded 2 guards, took Spencer's gun, headed southwest. In the corner of the page, a penciled line read, May return to Dry Hollow for revenge. Ross paused with his ladle. Bill McKinney gritted his teeth and hammered. The 3 washerwomen squeezed each other. Heaving, Mari inhaled the smell of cornstarch, her eyes scanning the newly plastered kitchen wall. The cracks in the bricks were ablaze with dark charcoal. She folded the paper, speaking slowly. If he escapes, he brings fire. I have fire too, kitchen fire. This time, I won't wait for him to whip me first. The news of Barrett's escape fueled the fire of rumors. For 3 days in a row, the cavalry sentries had reported seeing camp lights at the foot of Black Mesa, a black rock spur jutting out of the desert like the jaws of a saw. Alma said she heard the sound of practice guns in the middle of the night, and the little Perry boy claimed to have seen a light as big as a rising moon behind the hill. Blake researched. The 2-man scouting party returned with bloody noses and said Barrett had gathered more than 24 gunmen, fugitives, your trail bandits, and blood madmen. They had built mounds of sacks, arranged wagons in a circle like a cavalry artillery. Goat skulls hung in the middle, red coats and leather pants with swords, a motley but numerous army with Spencer rifles that could fire 3 blocks. At that news, Dry Hollow was suddenly as still as cold ash. The last nails hammered more slowly. The sound of Ross's banjo grew darker. The ash stove, though newly heated, could not mask the smell of fear. On Wednesday night, the long table in the cookhouse was covered with faded old maps, beside a plate of burnt cornbread. Muddy, wearing a rough shirt left by her mother, stood at the head of the table. On the left was Ross, his arm still bandaged. On the right, Blake was on crutches. Opposite were Bill and 12 young men holding hoes, axes, and rare hunting rifles. Mari dipped a ladle into a jar of thin honey and traced the image of the cookhouse kitchen at the center of the map. The stove was high, the chimney a watchtower. The hot ash wrapped in hemp, thrown down, would burn like a smoke bomb. The restaurant's courtyard was a narrow moat, using empty flour sacks filled with sand, arranged in zigzag grooves to prevent Spencer bullets. Kitchen utensils, a 20-liter cast iron pot cooked with chili Colorado peppers, would become a spicy cannon. Each time the lid was lifted and thrown, the chili fumes would sting the nose, forcing the enemy to take off his horse mask. Women spread out on the porch, boiling water pots mixed with salt and castor oil. Children were in charge of pouring wet sand to extinguish the fire. Ross's banjo changed the bell. 3 high notes changed position. 2 low notes, Spencer gun, plucked repeatedly, draw the backside. Blake cautiously asked, "How long will the stove hold out?" Mari replied, "Long enough for the ash fire to swallow the gunfire, and long enough for the county reinforcements to arrive if we hold out for 2 watches." Bill's dusty hand gripped the hammer handle. "We have more than a dozen axes to hold out against 20 guns. Do you believe it?" "I believe your stove does," Mari replied, her eyes red with fire. Ross struck a chord, like an oath. The plan was sealed by the sound of a ladle tapping the stove. Clack, clack, a sound more solid than a loaded gun. All night long, the stove was red hot. Mari cooked 3 pots of chili Colorado, 4 times as much chili, adding dried serrano pepper, cinnamon bark, and shallots to make the smoke sting the eyes. Alma rolled up the sand. Inez mixed the ashes with thick cactus resin, poured them into old flour sacks. Bill and the boys built a V-shaped sandbag bunker, leaving the smoke door facing the main road. Ross, despite his sore arm, climbed up to the roof, tied a string of tin cans filled with oil. The rope pulled, and oil would rain down on the horses' heads. At moonset, the cookhouse resembled a furnace. The spicy aroma of peppers rose high, mixing with the night wind to form a red strip. Everyone who passed by shed tears. Mari wanted it that way. If her people were coughing, they would cough even more. Before the quick nap, Mari went to the pumpkin patch to check the ashes. The sprouts were as tall as a hand. The leaves curled from the heat. She stroked them gently, whispering, "Tomorrow will be really hot." The leaves shook as if nodding. Before the rooster crowed, Bill shouted from the high hut, "Red bush coming from Black Mesa." Blake blew his whistle. It was a 3-note Ross banjo, and the whole town woke up. From afar, before the sun was golden, the bushes were already red like a wall of fire. Barrett's group marched in a U-shape. In the middle of the wagon, a wooden box tied to a Spencer gun, rotating the tower. The goat skull flag flapped in the wind. On the saddle were Barrett had his thighs bound, his face tan, Spencer in his arms, his eyes streaked with red. He shouted, "Lane, with Sisser and Messiber, you spill honey on the ashes. I'll spill your blood on the stove." Mari stood at the chimney, ladle in hand like a flag. Not answering, Ross played the chips, signaling to the smoke door. "Alma Owenabanaisuam, Ines, Wisur. Pilar poured the lid on the cauldron of boiling water to start it up. The steam rising like mist. Barrett ordered a preemptive fire. Spencer fired a soft bang, but the bullet tore through the eaves, embedded itself in the sandbag at the top of the trench. Bill hunched his shoulders. Screaming, Mari shouted, "Open the stove." Ross pulled the cord. The lid popped open. Colorado chili steam mixed with red pepper shot straight into the smoke door. The desert wind blew back, throwing the acrid stream toward the horses. The war horses whinnied hoarsely, their eyes white. The 3 horsemen swung their whips wildly, but the acrid heat hit them in the necks. They fired wildly. The bullets grazed Barrett's flag, scorching the fabric. In the confusion, Bill pulled out his shotgun and shot off the Spencer tower wheel. The heavy weapon broke its axle, spun sideways, and stopped roaring. Mari threw a signal. The laundry girls dropped buckets of castor oil from the eaves. The oil swept through the horse dust, stuck to the saddles, stuck to the guns, not yet burning but heavy and slippery. The bandits screamed because the saddles were slippery. They stepped on each other. The U-shaped line was in chaos. The soldiers rushed to the side. Barrett hissed, "Burn the village." He ordered the soldiers to circle around, lighting torches aimed at the stables. Avrainer Narai, Sermeen, the laundry. The well you want to enter. The militia had only 5 old guns left, not enough range. Mari ordered, "Hot ashes. Roof row, Pistorier to mani in my minisern." Ross played a solo banjo, the high strings screaming. At that signal, the children on the roof opened the bags of freshly burned ash mortar. The red ash, mixed with cactus resin, sticky as tar, poured down like rain. The ashes met the castor oil and quickly ignited, turning into brown flares that fell on the horses' faces. Barrett's soldiers lost their grip on the reins. 3 horses reared, knocked the torches over, and the fire went out halfway. On the edge, Bill and 2 miners used picks to hook the wooden posts of Barrett's makeshift camp, adding to the smoke. Blake limped along, still carrying his father-in-law's old Dillon gun, firing warning shots, the bullets slashing the dust close to the bandits' heels, forcing them to retreat. Barrett yelled, "Lane, one," and spurred his horse straight into the sandbag trench. Mari stood ready, a burning wooden ladle in her hand. As the horse's head overflowed the edge of the bag, she pulled the rope. Ross played 3 bass notes. Alma tilted the pot of boiling chili paste, pouring it straight into the horse's mane. The horse whinnied as if bitten by a snake, throwing Barrett off the saddle, rolling in the hot sand. Spencer flew out of his arms. Barrett scrambled to his feet, his face smeared with chili and ash. He drew his Bowie knife and rushed toward Marie. "You stove woman. You've burned my life away." Mari didn't retreat. She used the wooden ladle to block the swing. The handle cracked, but it changed direction enough for Bill to swing the hammer into Barrett's shoulder from behind the sandbag. He fell to his knees. The knife stuck next to the chimney. Mari swung the ladle, now half-handled, and smashed it flat against Barrett's forehead. The sound was dry and solid. Like a pot lid closing, Barrett collapsed, ash flying from his hair. Eyes glazed, tongue tied, Ross jumped down from the roof and tied him with sandbag ropes, this time tying 2 loops around his ankles. The bandits saw their leader fall. Taffer coughed, were afraid of the fire, and broke formation and fled. Blake fired into the air. "Leave Dry Hollow or bury yourself here." They threw down their guns and galloped north. The fire in the cookhouse was now a soft red. Murray knelt, panting. The wooden ladle had broken in 2, singed at the edges but still warm. She held the half-handle, her eyes stinging with chili, half from the smell, half from relief. When the sun rose, the district guards arrived 2 hours late. As Blake had expected, they rounded up the remaining bandits, carrying Barrett, tied up with chili-stained axe ropes. The commander, the first one, seeing the kitchen still smoking, admired. The Spencers were broken by wooden ladles and chili pots. "Remember where we were, Mari smiled, holding up her hand to smoke chili. The Dry Hollow people rushed to put out the last embers and lined up the fallen horses. Alma mixed brown sugar water to wash the children's faces. Ross lightly tapped the strings. The banjo now clearer after the smoke bombs. Bill replanted the homemade flagpole, a piece of burlap embroidered with a burnt ladle, a corn-yellow background. Blake took off his hat before Mari. "This time the ashes make strong mortar," Mari replied, holding up the broken half of the ladle. "The other half is enough to stir soup." The afternoon sun slanted up the squash bed. Green leaves grew beyond Mari's hips, tendrils clinging to new stakes. She sprinkled some cold ash around the base ashes from the second battle and turned back to the kitchen. The ash stove was red with coals, and there was rice, corn, pinto beans, onions, and, of course, serrano peppers to spice up the victory. On the porch, the wooden sign Dusty Spur Cookhouse, old ashes feeding new fires, was now smoky but standing firm. Below, Ross played the Ring of Fire off-key. Bill hammered along. Alma sang in a thick alto. The county colonel wrote in the book, "For self-defense, request to form Dusty Spur Cookhouse Militia." The children laughed at the strange phrase. At dusk, Mari held a broken half ladle to the top of the stove. The chimney exhaled a thin column of smoke, a pale coppery gray. The fire in the hearth trembled, reflecting her eyes, the eyes of Ross, Blake, Bill, Alma, and the others sitting in the ash yard eating cornbread soaked in spicy sweat. The desert was dark under the purple sky. The night wind had not yet blown away the smell of chili. The fire-on-fire battle closed but opened a new path. From now on, Dry Hollow considered the kitchen a fortress, the ashes a piece of tomorrow's construction, and any man who dared to carry the black flag would encounter the smell of burning red peppers, the fire that Mari and the cornbread-eating hearts shared. The morning sun poured through the Dusty Spur Cookhouse as Barrett Cole was dragged into the iron prison van. His back was ash-scraped. His hair was streaked with red peppers. The goat skull flag was now just a rag tied to his feet. Sheriff Blake signed the escort papers. But before the van rolled, he had the people line up in 2 rows to see him off. No sound of joy, just dusty faces standing tall. Barrett looked at the broken wooden ladle stuck in the new chimney, growled a final curse, but the sound was lost in the dust of the wheels. When the prison van was gone, Mari breathed a sigh of relief and went with Bill McKinney and 3 washerwomen around the city, collecting shell casings and pieces of burnt wood. Mari scooped the still warm ashes into a bamboo basket to preserve the mortar for the furnace when winter comes. In the afternoon, Blake read a requiem in the ash yard for the 2 dead miners. The makeshift bell, a piece of steel that Ross struck with a hammer, resonated softly but firmly. That night, the town slept its first sleep without the menacing smell of smoke, only the faint scent of cornbread on the straw pillows. For the next 2 weeks, the Dusty Spur Cookhouse opened at dawn. The ash walls were rough, but the red stoves were more fireproof than any brick oven in Santa Rita. Mari took turns cooking mild chili soup for the elderly, cheese cornbread for the children, and black coffee with cinnamon for the carpenters rebuilding the stables. Ross composed Song of the Red Spoon. Tips rattled like pebbles as he played it on the porch. News of Barrett's defeat spread to neighboring towns. Travelers stopped by Dry Hollow to taste the victory soup and then rented houses, bringing seeds, mini rapture, saws, and silver mining licenses. The roads, once marked only by horse hooves, were stained with the tracks of wagons carrying wood, sal, sornen, and molasses. Almanum, Asemant, Ines, Suri Tinortas, and Pilar quit their laundry jobs and opened a pastry shop next to the cookhouse. They called it Three Sisters Sweets, using the sour yeast they learned from Mari. At the edge of the kitchen, a row of squash fertilized with goat ash was green, and its tendrils wrapped around the bamboo trellis. When the squash was yellow and swollen, Mari invited the whole town to try her bacon squash soup. The sweetness was said to be like earth soaked in thanks. In the fall, Union and Pacific engineers came to survey the route around the Santa Rita Mountains. They needed a water station in the middle of the desert, in Dry Hollow now with a deep limestone well. And the cookhouse supplied hotcakes was the obvious choice. Blake read the station's opening letter, his voice trembling. The steamer will stop here every 3 days. Cheers mingled with banjo music. Mari quietly drew a circle on the new map with cold ash, a marker of the road out of poverty. A small train station sprang up next to the well. The boiler needed firewood, which the cookhouse traded for crushed coal. The ash seasoned with chili for the thick soup. Travelers put in silver coins. Bill opened a sleeper nail forge. The town, which had trembled at the sound of Spencer's explosion, now shook to the rhythm of steel hammers and train whistles. On June 3rd of the following year, exactly 1 year after Barrett spat on the old sign, Dry Hollow held its first founders' cookout. The once ash-covered square was now paved with pine boards. A flagpole with a canvas leaf embroidered with a wooden ladle stood in the center, next to a trellis of squash laden with oranges. Mari wore a silver-patched indigo dress but was clean of ash, and wore a broken half ladle hanging from her belt like a medal. Ross led an 8-piece banjo band. Alma and her sisters washed and set out trays of honey cheese ashmen. Blake gave a short speech. The ashes feed the fire. The fire makes the yeast. The yeast keeps us going. The yard shouted Amen instead of cheers, and raised bowls of red chili soup, a milder version, so the children wouldn't cry. At dusk, the first steam train whistled past the yard. Travelers in dust scarves stepped down, stunned by the smell of baking bread, the sound of fiddles and ladles. A little girl with wild hair pulled her father's hand and whispered, "Daddy, this town smells so good." Ross's steel bell struck the bottom of a banjo, chiming far away, joining the train whistle. Creating a new birth melody for Dry Hollow, Mari left the kitchen, walked along the rows of tables, checked the lime ash under the stove, still slightly pink. She touched the broken handle of the ladle, thinking of her mother. The last seasoning is to stand up. Standing, they did. Now the hearth contained something more. Standing, at night. Fireworks made from Bill's phosphorus lit up the black sky in purple-orange streaks. The ash fell on the ash walls, but no one brushed it away. They let the ashes mix with the old ash, knowing that tomorrow morning Mari would gather it up and mix it with mortar, just like all the ash that had ever fed the fire of this town. Before the party ended, Mari scooped up the last bowl of soup and carried it over to Blake, who was sitting on the porch laughing. He asked, "Are you still afraid of the black flag?" Mari looked at the row of heavy pumpkins, at the chimney spreading across the moonlight, and shook her head slightly. The desert still has sandstorms, but the kitchen has a roof now. If the wind blows, we stir the ash soup. Ross strummed a major chord cheerfully. The children dance and dance. The banjo, the train them. The sound of soup splashing in wooden bowls blended together to form a new rhythm for Dry Hollow. The night wind lifted the scent of ash bread and wafted it far along the tracks, telling the desert that from the ashes, the town had lit its own sun, a fire no longer for revenge, but for baking hope, day after day,